We are going to get knowledge about 3 topics here. First of all, can a woman realize the self? Can a woman be a jnani, a self-realized sage? Can the instructions of a woman guru be trusted and followed? Secondly, are occult powers necessary or useful? And finally, can performing actions and rituals alone confer salvation? These are questions and doubts that many people may have in their minds. Ramana Maharishi answers these questions and reveals the truths about all these subject matters through an enlightening story told by him. This is not just a story. In fact, you can learn all there is to learn about self-realization or salvation and how to attain it right here. So please listen carefully till the end for your own well-being and happiness. Here is the story first, and then at the end, the summary of truths revealed by this story as told by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi and his explanations. Sikhidvaja was a pious king. His spouse was Queen Chudala. They both received instructions from a sage. The king, being busy with the administration of his kingdom, could not put the instructions into practice, whereas Queen Chudala put them into practice and gained self-realization, knowledge of the real self. She realized the absolute truth, and her face shone brightly, and she became much more beautiful than before. Consequently, she appeared more charming than before. The king was struck by her growing charm and asked her about it. She said that all the charm was due to the Supreme Self, and the king was only noting the charm of self-realization in her. The king laughed at her, thinking that realization was possible only through severe austerities and could never be gained while living in a palace. He told her that she was silly and that there were great tapasvis, those who did great penance, who could not realize the self even after long periods of tapas, penance. And what about a silly woman who was all along in the family and in the worldly life? However, Chudala was not offended because she was firm in the self and only wished that her husband would realize the self and be happy. She then thought that unless she could prove by manifesting some extraordinary powers, the king could not be convinced, and she began to seek occult powers and gained them. But she did not betray them just then. Constant association with her made the king dispassionate. He began to dislike the worldly life and desired to retire into the forest for performing tapasya, penance. So he told his wife that he wanted to leave his worldly life for the forest. The queen was delighted at the development, but pretended to be very much concerned with his unkind decision. He hesitated out of consideration for her. In the meantime, his dispassion gained in force, and he decided to leave home even without her consent. When the queen was sleeping one night, he suddenly left the palace by stealth and retired into the forest. He sought and found some solitary spot where he could perform his tapas, and he performed hard penance. When the queen woke up, she did not find her husband and immediately found out by her occult powers what had really happened. She rejoiced in her husband's determination. She called the ministers and said that the king had gone away on some important business and that the administration should be carried on as efficiently as ever. The queen herself administered the state and ruled the kingdom in the absence of the king. Thus, 18 years passed. The queen, taking pity on the husband and anxious to rescue him from the mire of delusion, put her occult powers, siddhis, into practice. She took the guise of a great sage, Kumbha Muni, and stood in front of the king as a celestial being. The king, thinking that some celestial being had descended from the heavens to bless him, fell at the Muni's feet, told him his woes, and sought guidance. Then the queen, appearing as the Muni, taught the king as follows: Karmas, actions, can give fruit, results, as ordained by God. But karmas, actions, in themselves cannot grant you salvation. By performing disinterested actions without attachment, one's mind can become pure. With a pure mind, one should contemplate on the self. This would destroy the vasanas, deep mental tendencies. Then one should approach a master and through his grace learn how to inquire into the nature of the self. Liberation is possible only through inquiry and not by performing any amount of karmas, actions. By renouncing attachment to everything, one would realize the supreme truth. The king said that he had renounced everything, including his kingdom and family. The Muni, who was actually the queen, told him that his renunciation was only external and that the seeds of attachment were still in him. The king then took out his kamandalu, water pot, dandika, walking stick, rudrakshas, rosary beads, and other essential things, and threw them all into the fire, and stood without any possession. Then, on being told that he has still not renounced completely, the king was ready to drop his last possession, the body, by jumping from the top of the mountain. Then the queen, as the Muni, asked him, "What harm has the body done to deserve this punishment?" Thus the queen, as the Muni, taught him that he would not realize the truth by destroying the body, but only by destroying the mind, which was the source of all attachment. The queen taught him that the mind identifies itself as the limited I, and this is bondage. The snapping of this identity is renunciation of everything. The king listened carefully. Then the queen, still as the Muni, described in detail the sadhana, the practice of discrimination between the real and the unreal. Then the king's doubts were dispelled, and his mind became pure. He turned inward and quietly and deeply inquired into the source of I, and soon became one with it, and remained in blissful samadhi, perfect bliss. Then the queen, as Kumbhamuni, disappeared. After some time, the queen, as herself, returned to the forest. The king was still in samadhi, deep bliss, immersed in deep peace of the self. Queen Chudala tried to wake him up, but could not. Then, through her occult powers, she made the king become aware of the world. The king, now aware of the world, and yet filled with joy, now understanding the greatness of the queen, remained silent, not knowing how to express his gratitude to the queen. Then, as advised by the queen, he returned with her to the kingdom. Thus, while established in the supreme reality, he ruled the kingdom and lived happily with the queen for a long, long time. Here ends the story of King Sikhidwaja and Queen Chudala. To summarize, these are the three main things we learn from this story and Ramana Maharishi's explanations about it. Regarding the matter of women gurus, the truth is, it makes no difference whether one is a man or a woman when it comes to spiritual quests and self-realization. Ramana Maharishi has declared this emphatically in Ramana Gita. He has also mentioned this clearly several times during his conversations, especially to female devotees. For example, when a lady wanted to know if she can realize the self, he assured her authoritatively with the following divine words: "You are always the self. Earnest efforts never fail. Success is bound to result." Thus, he clarifies that both women and men can become a jnani, a self-realized sage or guru, and lead others, men and women. Regarding occult powers, Ramana Maharishi said as follows: "Occult powers are in the realm of the mind only and not spiritual. They are not worth striving for. Occult powers will not bring happiness to anyone, but will make them all the more miserable. The supernormal powers are more hindrances than helps in the path to the Supreme Spirit. However, occult powers are sought and gained for the benefit of others by self-realized persons also. But the sages are not deluded by the possession of such powers." And regarding performing actions and rituals with a view of salvation, he makes it perfectly clear that any amount of actions and rituals will not offer salvation or grant self-realization and liberation from bondage. He asserted that only non-attachment to the world and self-enquiry can lead one to salvation, self-realization, and liberation from bondage. Ramana Maharishi explained this in detail to a visitor as follows. Here is the conversation. Devotee: "How long will it take for one to gain Chintamani, the celestial gem that grants all the wishes of its owner?" Maharishi: The example of Chintamani is found in Yoga Vashishta. Chintamani signifies the real nature of the self. The story is as follows. A man was making tapasya, penance, for gaining Chintamani. A gem mysteriously fell into his hands. He thought that it could not be Chintamani because his efforts had been too short and too little to gain the gem. He discarded it and continued the tapas, penance. Later, a sadhu, a hermit, placed before him a brilliant pebble with facets cut. The man was taken in by its appearance, but found that it could not fulfill his desires as he originally supposed. Similarly, the self, being inherent, should not be sought for elsewhere. Again, an elephant used to be often teased and ill-treated by its keeper. The keeper once had an accident and fell down. The elephant could have killed him on the spot, but did not do so. Later, however, the keeper dug a big pit in the forest and killed the elephant. Queen Chudala illustrated Sikidvaja's error by this story. He had vairagya, non-attachment, dispassion, even while ruling his kingdom, and could have realized the self if only he had pushed his vairagya, non-attachment, to the point of killing the ego. He did not do it, but came to the forest, had a timetable of tapas, penance, and yet did not improve even after 18 years of tapas, penance. He has made himself a victim of his own creation. Queen Chudala advised him to give up the ego and realize the self, which he did and was liberated. Ramana Maharishi, after telling this story, further explained as follows. He said, "It is clear from Chudala's story that vairagya, non-attachment, accompanied by ego, is of no value, whereas all possessions in the absence of ego do not matter." These are the stories told and lessons taught by the great sage Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi and the great woman sage Queen Chudala.